Good afternoon and welcome to what I believe is week 13, if I'm not confused too much. We have read 1 Samuel 1 through 1 Samuel 20, and we are basically at April Fool's Day. This reading basically allows us to conclude almost the entire period of the Judges. Essentially, Samuel is the last judge. He serves as a judge, and then he in our reading this week, appoints Saul as the king over Israel. I would note to you that Moses died around 1400 BC, and it is now, at this point in our reading, about 1100 BC. So we have had a period of 300 years, plus or minus, during which time I believe the ark was at Shiloh for the entire time. Now in our reading, I'm going to read in my version, I'm going to read 1 Samuel 1 verses 10 and 11 because I want to read what Hannah said when she came to Shiloh for the annual feast. O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. So, not unlike Samson, Samuel was pretty well dedicated to the Lord by his mother. And Hannah was very happy when Samuel was born. So it appears after maybe 3 years, 4 years, I don't know, the child could talk and walk. So somewhere between 4 and 7 years of age, I would estimate, Hannah delivers this boy happily, in a way, to Eli. Now that's how we pronounce it. By my pronunciation guide, I would think it'd be Eli, but what do I know? So Eli hears her at the time of before the birth and said to her, go in peace, may God grant your request. And he did grant that request. And she delivered Samuel, the very firstborn male son, to Eli at Shiloh. So within Eli's care, and we'll see a little detail on that momentarily, within Eli's care, he is sleeping somewhere in or near the tabernacle, as is Eli, and God calls Eli at night. And of course, as you read or will read, Samuel thinks it's Eli calling him. And finally, Eli figures out that it must be God talking to him. And Samuel listens to God's message. And that message, sad to say, is that Eli's family is to be terminated, and they're all to die on one day. And as we'll soon discover, that does come to pass, but that is a sad forecast, and I will say to you that this is yet another example of an apparently somewhat dysfunctional family. Eli's sons are very, well, evil, I think, is the word I'd be forced to use. They're treating all the donations, the sacrifices as their private property, which is not in keeping with God's word. So in point of fact, God is going to punish them all for that behavior. Well, once this happens, once God's word becomes known to Samuel and it becomes known around that Samuel is a prophet, then Samuel's word is heard and admired and listened to throughout Israel. So at a later date, the Philistines begin attacking Israel, and the people of Israel, the warriors of Israel, suffer a fairly serious defeat. This occurred at Aphek, and the warriors suggest, and Eli's sons, and apparently Eli, go along with this concept, we'll bring the Ark of the Covenant to the battlefield. That will guarantee us success. Now, it appears to me that they carried the Ark of the Covenant, hopefully on the poles as they were supposed to, but without the benefit of the tabernacle, to Aphek, and at that point, God delivers them into the hands of the Philistines, as well as the Ark of the Covenant. So the Ark is captured. It's taken from Shiloh to Aphek, and there it is captured in battle by the Philistines, and the Philistines carry it off to, well, a series of their various cities. And the Ark becomes quite a curse for the Philistines. At the first place they take it, they put it in the temple of Dagon, or Dagon, I would suppose is the actual pronunciation. And when they return to the worship place of Dagon, they in fact find that their idol has been decapitated in that little place where they had it kept, along with now the Ark of the Covenant. And then they start suffering from tumors. I don't know exactly what that means, but it's obviously somehow hurting their body. And they ship it off to a different Philistine city. And all the cities of Philistia are frightened by the possibility of having the ark brought to their community. And what's fascinating is that they decide, well, we've got to get rid of the ark. We've got to send it back to the Israelites. And to me, this is a fascinating reading. I'm going to read just briefly a passage in 1 Samuel 6, verses 2 and 3. The priests of these false gods seem to have some understanding of the fact that God is indeed real. God is the creator. I don't know if they appreciate that, but they must understand it to some degree. Because when they're asked, what should we do with the ark of the Lord to get rid of it? Here's their response. They answered, if you return the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it away empty, but by all means send a guilt offering to him. Then you will be healed, and you will know why his hand has not been lifted from you. So the priests of the Philistines recognize that this is a punishment by the God, the Lord, the God of the Israelites. I think it's just fascinating that they had the insight to know that. And in fact, that's what they do. It's not entirely clear to me why they made gold rats, but they made gold rats and gold tumors and stuffed them into the ark and put it on a wagon hauled by a female cow who had given birth to a calf, and they leave the calf penned up, and the cow takes off toward Israel, lowing continually with the calf bleeding for its mother in the background, and it walks back to Israel with the wagon attached. And so it ends up in Beth Sheman, Beth Shemesh, and there, the Israelites, they're happy to have the ark back, or they appear to be happy. They basically deface the ark by opening it and inspecting it, looking at it, and they are also struck with illness as a result. Or actually, they're struck dead, if I read it correctly. So they want to get rid of the ark, and the men of Kiriath Jearim take the ark from Beth Shemesh to their town, to Kiriath Jearim. So the ark actually stays there for the next 20 years. And again, it appears to be in a man's house, or I don't know, maybe what would we call it? A hut out in the backyard. And it stays there without benefit of the tabernacle for those 20 years. So again, they sin. Again, Samuel explains they must be rid of foreign gods and Ashtoreths and Baals. The ark is returned, or is still at Kiriath Jearim, and Samuel's sons are now bad actors. So the Eli's sons were bad actors. Now Samuel's sons are bad actors. And this, after Samuel saw all that happen and saw that it led to the death of the whole family, Samuel summarizes what kings will do to the people of Israel. He warns them that these are bad things that a king will do. Nonetheless, they say, we want to have a king like all the countries around us. And indeed, as you have read, lo and behold, Samuel is selected. Now, within Samuel's life, while the ark is still at Kiriath Jearim, Saul takes on the role of the Levites and offers sacrifices, and he fails to execute God's instructions accurately. So now Samuel, who's now under the king, he's no longer the judge over all Israel. I mean, effectively he is, but nonetheless, he has to rebuke Saul, and while Saul's still alive, he anoints David as the new king to be, even though he's a young boy at this time. So then David becomes Saul's servant, and Saul is subject to evil spirits, and David plays the harp to try to soothe him. And finally, as we read, he does kill Goliath, which makes him a hero among the people, and begins an unpleasant history with Saul trying to do away with David, who is going to be his successor. However, David and Saul's son, Jonathan, become true friends, and that friendship exists for the balance of Jonathan's life and actually through the balance of David's life as well. So with this, we have reached the start of the kingdom of Israel, as opposed to the Israel where every man did as he thought was best. At this point, congratulations are in order. We have completed 1/4 of the reading. We're 1/4 of the way through the Bible, and we will carry on reading about David and Saul in the coming week. Thank you for joining us again.